Just over the Cheviot border in Roxburghshire, the Linton worm of the Somerville legend had his hole. Linton Tower was the fortalice of the Somerville family, the head of which, in the reign of William the Lion, was John of that ilk, the hero of the tale. The noxious creature of this story has been quite minutely described by a Somerville family historian of the 17th century, who declares that it was, in length, 3 Scots yards and somewhat bigger than an ordinary man's leg, with a head more proportionable to its length than greatness, and in form and colour like to our common muir-edders. The moderation of this historian is really remarkable, when it is an essential part of the ancient legend that the Linton worm was in the habit of coiling itself round a neighbouring hill, and by its breath destroying all the animal and vegetable life it could from that post of vantage. Indeed, the local gossips still point out a series of indented spiral lines circling the sides of that hill, and solemnly aver that they were caused by the violent contractions of the worm in its dying agony. The knight is stated to have accomplished the death of the creature by the employment of burning pitch, which for some reason is always accounted to be particularly effective in such operations against the fearsome dragons of destructive propensities. Whenever a new bishop of Durham, who is one of our English prince bishops, enters his diocese for the first time, a curious ceremony is performed by the lord of the manor of Sockburn, who holds his lands by the tenure of presenting to his lordship, as an emblem of his temporal power, an ancient falchion. The weapon is supposed to be the identical sword with which Sir John Conyers in olden times slew a monstrous and poisonous vermin or wyvern which overthrew and devoured many people. In making the presentation, the tenant of Sockburn repeats the following address.
My Lord Bishop, I here present you with the falchion wherewith the champion Conyers slew the worm, dragon, or fiery flying serpent which destroyed man, woman, and child, in memory of which the king then reigning gave him the manor of Sockburn to hold by this tenure, that upon the very first entrance of every bishop into the county this falchion should be presented.
Sir John Conyers died in 1395, and the effigy of him on his tomb has one foot on a figure of the wyvern or worm, and the other against the flank of his faithful hound, whose teeth are clenched in the monster's throat. It is not impossible that the legend was invented from the sculptor's design, which was meant to have a religious significance, a good man's triumph over spiritual evil. Between Slingsby and Hovingham in Yorkshire dwelt a monstrous worm a mile long, which occupied a cave by the roadside from which it issued at certain times to devour not only the crops of the peasantry, but their children and themselves. So intolerable did the pest become that at length Marmaduke Wyville, the Lord of Slingsby Hall, made a vow to heaven that he would destroy the loathsome beast. So, after due preparation, he sallied forth to the attack and slew the worm. At the neighbouring church of Osgoodby may be seen the sculptured effigy of the valiant champion, and that of his faithful hound who helped him so bravely in the long and gory conflict. At Grendale, near Loftus, or Loft House, in the North Riding, a block of stone was dug out of the ground not so many years ago, on which were found carved representations of a man's effigy with a formidable looking sword, and at once ingenious efforts were made to connect this rude sculpture with the legend of the valorous Sir John Conyers, who slew a monstrous and poisonous vermin or wyvern, an ask or worm, which overthrew and devoured many people in fight, for that the scent of that poison was so strong that no person might abide it. Again, at Kellington in the West Riding, where the dragon theme also crops up, the usual commemoration will be found in the shape of a stone with the carving of a man, sword and serpent. The slayer of the Kellington worm was one Ormroyd, while the hero of the Slingsby legend was a Wivil. Names in which we have respectively the syllables orm, a form of worm, and wiv, an abbreviation of wyvern. Facts which give rise to the suspicion that in these two cases there is some connection between the origin of the legend and the family name of the traditional hero of it. In Ord's History of Cleveland is an illustration showing a grave cover from Hundale Priory, with a dragon carved on it. A dragon story connected with this priory has a youth named Score as the hero of it. Again, in the Victoria History of Cumberland is an interesting illustration of a Saxon dragon carved on a lintel at St Bees. In Burton Agnes Church, East Riding of Yorkshire, is the effigy of Sir Walter Griffiths, whose feet rest against a griffin, the canting badge of the family. But the griffin is minus its beak. The story is that this griffin used to ravage the country round, slaying and eating children and decimating the domestic herds, until Sir Walter succeeded in slaying the beast by cutting off its beak. In East Harlesly Church, North Riding, is the cross-legged effigy of an unknown knight, to whom local legend ascribes a wonderful victory over a worm that lived in a hole under Arncliffe. In the same locality is current the story of an Arn eagle of the cliff, which also fought with another worm that had its lurking place in a hole at the foot of the hill. The combat was so severe that both fighters were compelled to retire to their respective lairs, where they died of their wounds. The origin of such stories is always doubtful. To distinguish between ancient dragon legends and the inventions of the 17th and 18th centuries is sometimes difficult.